Berlin, December 1991. The wall was gone. The Soviet Union was crumbling into pieces. East Germany existed only in the memories of those who had lived through it. The city was transforming itself. Construction cranes rose like skeletal fingers above piles of rubble where guard towers once stood. Western investors bought entire neighborhoods. Refugees from across Eastern Europe filled hotels and temporary shelters. The Cold War was over. Everyone declared that history had ended, that democracy and capitalism had won. Yet in the shadows of this optimistic chaos, old scores remained unsettled. Deep within the archives of West German intelligence lay a file unopened since 1986. Inside were photographs, surveillance reports, and ballistic analysis documenting 17 contract killings across Europe and the Middle East. The perpetrator was a sniper so precise his victims died before the sound of the shot reached witnesses. So careful that not a single shell casing was ever found. So professional that no government could definitively prove who hired him, though everyone knew. The file was labeled Operation Red Wolf. The target was Yuri Volkov, a Soviet sniper whose confirmed kill count exceeded 100, though the real number was believed to be far higher. For 15 years he had been a ghost, operating on the battlefields of the Cold War and in urban assassination zones, eliminating dissidents, defectors, enemy intelligence officers, and anyone Moscow considered expendable. Now, with the Soviet apparatus collapsing, he had become a freelancer, selling his skills to the highest bidder. And Israeli intelligence had just learned he was in Berlin. The man reading Volkov's file in a secure room beneath the Israeli embassy was named Amos Gelat. He was 43 years old, an operations officer for Mossad, having joined after mandatory military service in an elite intelligence unit. He had spent 2 decades conducting surveillance, running agents, and coordinating operations across Europe and the Middle East. He did not look like a spy. He looked like a middle-aged accountant with thinning hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and a small paunch from too many hours at a desk. This ordinariness was his operational advantage. Nobody noticed him. Gelat studied a photograph of Volkov taken by KGB surveillance in 1983. It showed a man in his 30s, thin and unremarkable, with pale eyes and a narrow face showing no emotion. He could have been a factory worker, a bus driver, a librarian. Nothing in his appearance hinted at the lethal danger, but his work was documented in the file with clinical precision. A Mossad officer shot through the window of his Tel Aviv apartment in 1979. A Palestinian defector killed in a Rome hotel room in 1981. A Jewish dissident eliminated in Moscow in 1984. Each murder was carried out from extreme distance with a single shot. No witnesses, no evidence, just bodies and the knowledge that Volkov had been nearby. The information placing Volkov in Berlin came from an unexpected source. A former Stasi officer named Klaus Richter. When East Germany collapsed, Richter found himself unemployed, his pension worthless, his skills unwanted in a reunified Germany eager to forget the existence of a total surveillance state. Desperate for money, he approached Western intelligence agencies, offering to sell information on Soviet operations in East Berlin from his years monitoring them. Most of what he offered was outdated or irrelevant, but buried in his records was a name and an address. Yuri Volkov was living in Prenzlauer Berg, a former East Berlin neighborhood now filling with artists, squatters, and entrepreneurs who saw opportunity in abandoned buildings and cheap rent. Richter had monitored Volkov in the 1980s as part of Stasi's surveillance of Soviet personnel. Though he never understood what Volkov actually did, he simply recorded his presence, logged his movements, and filed reports nobody read. Now those dusty reports had value. The CIA paid Richter 10,000 Deutschmarks for the information, then shared it with Mossad, acknowledging that eliminating Volkov served American interests as much as Israeli ones. Gelat's orders were clear but deliberately vague. Find Volkov, confirm his identity, report to Tel Aviv, do not make contact without authorization. The ambiguity was intentional. Mossad leadership wanted plausible deniability if the operation went wrong. If Gelat succeeded, they would take credit. If he failed or was caught, they would disavow any knowledge of him. This was standard operating procedure for sensitive operations conducted on Allied soil without official permission. Gelat assembled a small team. He could not use the embassy's intelligence staff, whose activities were monitored by German counterintelligence. Instead, he hired freelancers, sayanim, a Hebrew word meaning helpers. Jewish volunteers living abroad who assist Mossad operations without formal ties to Israeli intelligence. They provide safe houses, vehicles, communications, and logistical support while leading ordinary civilian lives that draw no suspicion. His team consisted of 5 people. Ruth, a 50-year-old Jewish woman born in Berlin, ran a travel agency and provided cover documents. Michael, a 32-year-old freelance photographer, conducted surveillance while pretending to document Berlin's transformation. Sarah, a 28-year-old graduate student at Humboldt University, could move through Prenzlauer Berg without drawing attention. David, a 45-year-old businessman, provided transport and equipment through his import-export company. Gelet himself coordinated the operation from a rented apartment in Charlottenburg, away from Volkov's area. Surveillance began in early December. Berlin's winter was harsh, temperatures dropping below freezing, wet heavy snow turning streets into slushy obstacles. The cold worked in the team's favor. People moved quickly between destinations, heads down, faces hidden by scarves and hoods. Nobody lingered outside longer than necessary. Suspicious behavior blended into the general gloom of winter street life. Volkov's apartment was on the 4th floor of a building once housing East German factory workers. The structure was typical of the Soviet era. Concrete utilitarian, slowly decaying from decades of minimal maintenance. The stairwell smelled of mold and cigarettes. The elevator worked intermittently. Most residents were elderly Germans who had survived the war and subsequent divisions, now watching with bewilderment and resentment as their neighborhood transformed around them. Michael set up an observation post in a building across the street, renting a room from an elderly woman grateful for the income and asking no questions. From his window, he photographed Volkov's apartment with a telephoto lens, documenting when lights turned on and off, when curtains opened and closed, when anyone entered or exited the building. Surveillance was tedious work requiring patience and discipline. Hours passed with nothing, then a light would appear, a shadow move behind a curtain, the shutter click. For 3 days, Volkov did not appear. His apartment remained dark except for occasional lights suggesting someone was home but avoiding visibility. This behavior matched someone practicing counter-surveillance, waiting to see if they were being watched. An experienced operative knows the first days after arriving in a new location are the most dangerous. Enemies knowing your location will strike quickly before you establish security protocols. Volkov was waiting. On the 4th day, he finally left the building. Michael captured the moment on film. A man in a dark coat and woolen hat exited through the main entrance, turned left toward the U-Bahn station. He walked at a measured pace, neither hurried nor casual, scanning the street with a trained gaze. Sarah picked up the tail when he entered the subway, following 3 carriages behind, pretending to read a paperback. Volkov rode the Utwo line from Eberswalder Strasse to Alexanderplatz, then transferred to the U5 toward Friedrichsfelde. He exited at Frankfurter Tor, walked 2 blocks, entered a cafe, ordered coffee, and sat by a window with a good view of the entrance and street. He remained there for 90 minutes, watching everyone who entered, occasionally making notes in a small notebook. Then he paid, left, and returned to his apartment by a different route, doubling back twice to check for followers. The surveillance pattern continued for 2 weeks. Volkov went out every 3 or 4 days, always at different times, always using different routes. He visited cafes, bookstores, shooting ranges on the outskirts of former East Berlin. He met with nobody, spoke to nobody beyond minimal necessary interactions. His behavior suggested he was waiting for a contact, preparing for a job, or simply maintaining operational security out of ingrained habit. Gelet analyzed these patterns, searching for vulnerabilities. Volkov was too cautious for a street ambush. He varied his routes, watched for surveillance, never exposed himself unpredictably. An assault at his residence could cause civilian casualties and create diplomatic problems if the operation went wrong. The shooting range was an opportunity, but there were too many witnesses and unpredictable variables. They needed a controlled environment where Volkov could be isolated and eliminated without collateral damage or immediate detection. The answer came from an unexpected source. David, the businessman, mentioned knowing someone in Berlin's Russian immigrant community who might have information on Volkov. This contact was a former Soviet army officer named Sergei Volsky, who had emigrated to West Berlin in 1989 after serving in Afghanistan. Volsky ran a small import business selling Russian goods to nostalgic immigrants and curious Germans. He had connections within the community of former Soviet personnel now living in Germany, caught between the collapsed empire they served and a new reality they barely understood. Gelet met Volsky in a bar in Kreuzberg, a district where Turks, punks, and artists coexisted in uneasy proximity. Volsky was in his 50s, heavy-set with a salt-and-pepper beard and the tired eyes of a man who had seen too much violence. He drank vodka methodically, not for pleasure but from habit. When Gelet explained what he wanted, Volsky laughed bitterly. "You want to kill the Red Wolf?" he asked in accented German. "Many have tried. He is still alive, they are not." Gelet asked what Volsky knew about Volkov's current activities. Volsky explained that Volkov had been asking around the immigrant community for work. A man with his skills could easily find employment in the chaos of post-Soviet Europe. Criminal organizations needed enforcers. Intelligence services needed disposable assets. Warriors in the Balkans demanded snipers who asked no questions. Volsky had heard through back channels that Volkov had been approached by a Chechen crime syndicate operating in Berlin, offering a contract to eliminate the leader of a rival gang. This information changed operational planning. If Volkov accepted the contract, he would conduct surveillance, identify the target's patterns, and prepare for the shot. Mossad could track his preparations, determine when and where the hit would occur, and intercept him before or immediately after. The advantage was that Volkov would be focused on his target, not on counter-surveillance against threats from his past. Volsky agreed to help for 50,000 Deutschmarks and safe passage to Israel if the operation went wrong and he needed to disappear. Gelet agreed without authorization from Tel Aviv, knowing he would face consequences later but recognizing operational necessity sometimes required exceeding official mandates. Volsky provided the name of the Chechen contact and the location where meetings took place, a nightclub in Wedding, one of Berlin's toughest neighborhoods. Michael began surveillance on the nightclub, photographing everyone who entered and exited. The clientele was rough. Men in leather jackets moving with the restrained aggression of people accustomed to physical confrontation. Women with heavy makeup laughing loudly at unfunny jokes. The club was owned by Ruslan Israev, a Chechen who fled to Germany during the First Chechen War and built a criminal empire on extortion, drug trafficking, and contract killings. On December 18th, surveillance recorded Volkov entering the nightclub at 23:47. He remained inside for 38 minutes, then exited alone and returned to his apartment. 3 days later, he began conducting surveillance on a Turkish restaurant in Neukölln, photographing the entrance from different angles, noting arrival and departure schedules. The target became clear. Mehmet Azdemir, leader of a rival gang whose organization controlled heroin distribution in southern Berlin. Gelet reported developments to Tel Aviv via encrypted communication. The reply came within 12 hours. Proceed with termination, authorize lethal force, minimize collateral damage, destroy all evidence. The authorization was what Gelet expected, but seeing it in writing made the operation irreversible. Now they were committed to killing Volkov on German soil without official sanction, betting that if they succeeded quickly and cleanly, German authorities would look the other way given Volkov's past and the target's identity. The problem was timing. If they struck before Volkov carried out his hit, German police would investigate a murder with no visible motive, potentially exposing Mossad's operation. If they waited until he killed Azdemir, Volkov would be on high alert, expecting retaliation from the Chechen gang and police pursuit. The optimal moment was during the hit itself, when Volkov would be fully focused on his target and vulnerable to unexpected attack. Gelet's plan was simple. Identify Volkov's firing position the team nearby, and eliminate him immediately after he fired. The shot that killed Azdemir would mask the shot that killed Volkov. In the chaos following the assassination, their team would evacuate before police arrived. Volkov's body would be discovered, explained either as gang-related murder or a suicide. The operation required absolute discipline and precise timing. Michael's surveillance identified the most likely firing position, the roof of an abandoned apartment building overlooking the restaurant. The building was scheduled for demolition but remained accessible through a broken rear entrance. From the roof, Volkov would have a clear line of fire to the restaurant's main entrance, approximately 180 meters away, a difficult shot but well within a sniper of Volkov's caliber. On December 22nd, Sarah confirmed Volkov had visited the abandoned building twice, staying inside for extended periods. Engineers later hired by Gillette confirmed the roof provided the best vantage point for observing the restaurant without being seen from the street. Volkov was preparing his position, calculating wind patterns, distances, escape routes. The kill was imminent. Gillette decided they would strike on December 23rd, based on Volsky's intelligence that Azdemir had a standing reservation at the restaurant every Friday evening at 7. If Volkov was going to act, it would be then. The team began final preparations. David acquired a bolt-action rifle with a suppressor, obtaining it through black market contacts in the former East, where weapons from disbanded military units were sold without questions. Michael took up position in a building adjacent to the abandoned structure, where he could observe Volkov's approach and signal when he entered. Ruth provided a delivery van with stolen plates to be discarded after the operation, and false documents identifying the team as construction workers in case of a police stop. Sarah prepared an evacuation route through back alleys and side streets, avoiding major intersections where traffic cameras could capture their vehicle. Everything was rehearsed repeatedly until every movement was automatic. December 23, 1991, the temperature dropped to -8°C. Snow fell continuously, accumulating on streets and roofs, muffling sound and reducing visibility. The weather was both an advantage and a risk. Volkov's shot would be more difficult under these conditions, possibly causing him to abort. But if he proceeded, the snow would help conceal Gillette's team and complicate forensic investigation afterward. At 16:30, Michael signaled that Volkov had entered the abandoned building, carrying a long case clearly containing a rifle. Gillette and David, dressed in construction overalls and hard hats, entered through the same broken rear entrance 8 minutes later. They moved cautiously through the darkened interior, using small flashlights to navigate trash-strewn corridors and stairwells where addicts and homeless had left makeshift camps. The building smelled of urine, mold, and decay. They reached the top floor and found a ladder for roof access. David climbed first, moving slowly to avoid noise. Gillette followed, gripping the cold metal rungs with gloved hands. On the roof, snow lay like a white blanket, disturbed only by footprints leading to the western edge of the building. They followed them, staying low to avoid becoming silhouettes against the gray sky. Volkov had positioned himself behind a low concrete wall that once supported the building's sign. He had cleared snow from his firing position, creating a small space where he lay prone. His rifle rested on a folded jacket. He was fully focused on the restaurant below, tracking movement through his scope, calculating angles. He did not hear their approach until David was 3 meters away. The confrontation lasted 7 seconds. Volkov rolled left, reaching for a pistol in a holster on his hip. David fired twice. Both bullets struck Volkov in the chest. The suppressed rifle made quiet coughing sounds lost in the wind. Volkov slumped against the concrete wall. Blood spread across his coat. His eyes remained open, pale and impassive, even in death. Gillette knelt beside the body, confirming no pulse. He photographed Volkov's face for Tel Aviv, then searched his pockets, removing a passport, wallet, and notebook filled with coded entries. David collected Volkov's rifle and pistol, wiping both weapons of fingerprints before placing them next to the body. The scene was staged to suggest suicide or an internal criminal conflict. Though forensic experts would eventually determine the truth, they descended the ladder and exited the building at 17:47, 13 minutes before Azdemir's scheduled arrival at the restaurant. The Turkish gang leader would dine unaware he had been saved by people he never met, who killed the sniper sent to eliminate him for reasons unrelated to his survival. Ruth waited with the delivery van 3 blocks away. They loaded the weapons amid construction debris in the back and drove slowly through the snow-covered streets toward West Berlin. At 21:15, Gillette transmitted an encrypted message to Tel Aviv. Package delivered, operation complete. He destroyed the encryption device, smashing it into pieces and scattering them across different trash bins throughout the city. By morning, he would be on a plane to Tel Aviv via Vienna, using false documents identifying him as a textile importer. Michael, Sarah, Ruth, and David remained in Berlin, returning to their normal lives as if nothing had happened. German police discovered Volkov's body on December 24th after residents reported hearing shots the previous evening. The initial investigation suggested gang violence, given the location and Volkov's alleged criminal connections. But when ballistic analysis showed he was shot with military-grade ammunition, and forensics found evidence of professional staging, the case attracted federal authorities specializing in organized crime and intelligence-linked murders. Within a week, the BND, Germany's Foreign Intelligence Service, identified the victim as Yuri Volkov, a former Soviet sniper linked to the KGB and later to criminal organizations across Eastern Europe. The Operation Red Wolf file was reopened. Questions were asked about who would want Volkov dead and whether foreign intelligence services were involved. The Israeli embassy was contacted through diplomatic channels. Officials expressed surprise and concern, offered cooperation, and denied any knowledge of operations targeting Volkov. The investigation continued for 6 months before being quietly closed. No arrests were made, no charges filed. The official conclusion was that Volkov was killed by criminal associates in a dispute over payment for services. The truth remained classified in files few were cleared to read. The Red Wolf was dead, eliminated by a team that left no traces and no witnesses beyond a corpse found in the snow. In Tel Aviv, Amos Gelet returned to his desk job, analyzing intelligence reports and coordinating surveillance operations across Europe. He received no public recognition for the Berlin operation. There were no medals, no ceremonies, no commendation beyond a brief entry in his personnel file. This is how intelligence work functions. Success is measured in silence. Careers are built on operations that officially never happened. Lives are ended by decisions made in windowless rooms far from where blood is spilled. The psychological consequences are complex. Gelet had killed before during his military service and in previous operations. But those deaths occurred in contexts where violence was expected. War zones, counterterrorism operations, situations where the logic was kill or be killed. The Berlin operation was different. It was a deliberate execution, meticulously planned and coldly carried out. Volkov was dangerous and undeserving of sympathy, but the very act of hunting another person, tracking him through a foreign city, and shooting him on a snow-covered roof creates a moral weight that rational justification cannot fully resolve. In the months after Berlin, Gelet drank more. Not enough to draw attention from colleagues, but enough for his wife to notice and express concern. He attended mandatory psychological counseling sessions Mossad required after lethal operations. The psychologist, a woman in her 50s who had evaluated hundreds of intelligence officers, asked standard questions about guilt, nightmares, intrusive thoughts. Gelet gave standard answers. He slept fine, felt no regret, understood his actions protected Israeli lives. He lied, but they both knew the lie was part of the process. The truth was he sometimes saw Volkov's face, not as in surveillance photos or intelligence files, but as it was in those final seconds on the roof. Pale eyes registering surprise, then acceptance, then nothing. Blood spreading across snow, the absolute stillness that follows violent death. These images returned at unexpected moments. During his commute, playing with his children, lying awake at 3 in the morning while his wife slept beside him. Volkov's death did not eliminate the threat he represented. Other snipers emerged to fill the void he left. Criminal organizations found new mercenaries. Intelligence services recruited new operatives. The cycle continued because the underlying factors creating men like Volkov, war, ideology, desperation, ambition, remained unchanged. Eliminating one sniper did not reduce the world's supply of violence. It merely temporarily removed one person from circulation until someone else took his place. This reality troubled Gelet more than the killing itself. He had dedicated his career to protecting Israel, neutralizing threats, preventing attacks that could kill innocent people. But there was no end to the work. There was always another target, another operation, another file requiring attention. Success was temporary. Security is an illusion maintained by constant vigilance and periodic violence. Victory in Berlin was merely a data point in an endless struggle that would outlive everyone involved. For historians studying intelligence operations, the elimination of Yuri Volkov became an example of targeted killing in the chaotic post-Cold War period, when former Soviet operatives became freelancers available to the highest bidder. The Mossad operation demonstrated several principles that would define Israeli intelligence doctrine for decades. The willingness to conduct operations on Allied soil without official permission, the use of freelance assets to maintain plausible deniability, and the prioritization of operational success over diplomatic consequences. The operation also highlighted evolving tensions within Western intelligence communities regarding rules of engagement and sovereignty. The German BND understood Mossad had killed Volkov on German soil, likely with at least passive American knowledge, if not tacit coordination. But publicly acknowledging this reality would require admitting Germany could not control foreign intelligence operations within its borders, undermining claims of sovereignty and law enforcement capability. Thus, the investigation was closed, the truth classified, and everyone pretended to accept the official conclusion. This dynamic, truth known privately but publicly denied, defines how intelligence operations function in the modern world. Nations maintain carefully crafted fictions about respecting sovereignty and international law while violating both when deemed necessary. The hypocrisy is understood by all participants but never openly acknowledged, creating a shadow realm where actions occur that official reality cannot incorporate. The elimination of the Red Wolf became legend within Mossad, told to new recruits as an example of successful planning and execution. Details were sanitized. No mention of unauthorized expenditures, no discussion of the moral ambiguity of executing a man without trial, no acknowledgement of the psychological costs borne by the operatives who carried it out. Instead, the story emphasized precision, discipline, and the successful neutralization of a high-value target threatening Israeli security. This sanitized narrative served institutional purposes. It boosted morale, reinforced organizational identity, and provided a model for future operations. But it also obscured the dirty reality of intelligence work. The compromises required, the innocent people used as assets without their knowledge, the families shattered when operations go wrong, the operatives who drink themselves to sleep or wake up screaming from nightmares they can never discuss. Berlin's snow melted. The abandoned building where Volkov died was demolished in 1993, replaced by modern apartments housing young people unaware of what happened on that roof in December 1991. The restaurant where Mehmet Azdemir would have been killed closed in 1995, reopening as a Vietnamese bistro serving overpriced pho to tourists and students. The nightclub where Volkov met his Chechen contacts burned down in 1998, under suspicious circumstances investigators attributed to insurance fraud. The physical evidence of Operation Red Wolf was erased, but the operation's consequences rippled outward through time. Intelligence services learned lessons about targeting methodology that informed subsequent operations. German counterintelligence developed new protocols for monitoring foreign intelligence activity within its borders. The Chechen criminal organization, deprived of its hired sniper, escalated its conflict with the Turkish gang by less sophisticated means, leading to a street war that claimed 17 lives over 3 years. These secondary effects are impossible to calculate precisely. Would those 17 have died anyway? Would other operations have yielded the same lessons? Counterfactual history is speculation, not analysis. What remains certain is that Yuri Volkov died in the snow because Israeli intelligence determined he represented an unacceptable threat and possessed the capability to eliminate him with acceptable risk. Everything else is interpretation. Amos Gelat retired from Mossad in 2003 after 31 years of service. He received a modest pension and a commendation letter mentioning no specific operations by name. He moved to a quiet Tel Aviv suburb where he grows tomatoes in his garden and occasionally meets former colleagues at a cafe where they discuss children, politics, and sports, carefully avoiding any mention of their shared past. When asked about his career, he describes himself as having worked in government security, a vague phrase that satisfies curiosity without revealing anything meaningful. He has never spoken publicly about the Berlin operation and never will. The secrets he keeps will die with him, locked in classified files and fading memory. This is the covenant intelligence officers accept. You will know things you cannot share, do things you cannot discuss, carry burdens you cannot acknowledge. In return, the state promises protection, purpose, and the knowledge that your sacrifices matter even if they must remain invisible. Whether this covenant is fairly upheld by the institutions demanding silence in exchange for missions that haunt operatives for decades admits no comfortable answers. The services depend on officers willing to accept this bargain. Those officers depend on faith that their work serves something greater than bureaucratic self-preservation. The relationship is symbiotic and exploitative, necessary and corrosive, patriotic and tragic. Snow falls in Berlin every winter. People walk past the building that replaced the one where Volkov died, unaware of what happened on the ground they cross daily. This invisibility is the point. Intelligence operations are successful when they leave no trace beyond the eliminated threat and classified files nobody reads. The perfect operation is one that never becomes public, where success is measured by the quiet satisfaction that a problem was solved and a threat neutralized. Operation Red Wolf met that standard. Yuri Volkov was eliminated efficiently, with minimal collateral damage and no long-term diplomatic consequences. The team dispersed unidentified, evidence was destroyed. The truth was classified. From an institutional perspective, the operation was exemplary. From a human perspective, it was one man hunting another in a foreign city in winter, motivated by calculations about security and threat reduction that required one man's death to maintain a broader system. Whether that calculation is morally justified depends on how one weighs individual lives against collective security, whether ends justify means, and what obligations a state bears toward those it orders to commit violence in the shadows on its behalf. These are questions Amos Gelat sometimes considers late at night when sleep eludes him and his mind returns to Berlin, December 1991. Standing on a snow-covered roof above a city where history was simultaneously ending and beginning. He remembers the cold, the weight of the rifle, the sound of muffled shots, the absolute silence that followed. He remembers thinking it was necessary, justified, right. He remembers wondering if he would always believe that, or if doubt would erode certainty over time until he was no longer sure why he did what he did, only that he could never undo it. The Red Wolf is dead. The man who killed him lives quietly in a Tel Aviv suburb, growing tomatoes and remembering. If you found this story of shadows and decisions compelling, please show your support by liking this video. Your engagement helps bring more untold stories to light. Consider subscribing for deeper dives into the hidden histories that shape our world. And if you know someone interested in the intricate realities of intelligence work, please share this with them. Thank you for watching.